The clash over the currency was a serious setback for the Yes campaign. The post-referendum Ashcroft poll ranked this issue head and shoulders above all others in influencing the decision among no voters. The independence vision won the hearts of the 45%, but not the heads of the 55%, and understandably so. Independence should be promising something better than sharing the decline of sterling, an escalating national debt, a persistent balance of payments deficit, dodgy pensions, zero interest rates, bank bailouts, and all the financial jiggery-pokery which now seems to dominate our daily lives in the UK. Surely Scotland deserved a currency solution equipped to deal with these 21st century problems. But Mr. Salmond depended upon advice from his Council of Economic Advisers, top bankers and academic economists, all respected oracles and creatures of the financial establishment. The advice he got was predictable. No problem, Alex. We can just share the pound. We're all quite comfortable with that, thank you. That snuffed out any prospect of economic innovation or financial autonomy. And so, the day was lost. More recently, the Greek Prime Minister succumbed to the unelected Troika, which represented the German commercial banks. They just couldn't resist making lucrative loans to the Greek banks. When they proved unrepayable, the German banks should have lost their shirts, just as any other private enterprise which failed to act responsibly. It was not the Greek people to blame, but it was just another well-intentioned government unable to deal with banks and bankers who habitually expect to be bailed out by the very taxpayers they've just screwed. There is a lesson here for Scotland's MPs. The bankers are not interested in you or us. When you sup with them, use a long spoon. But first, a few words about Ronnie Morrison, who put this wee show together. He is the co-author with Andy Anderson of Moving On. At present, the only book which sets out in some detail the case for a Scottish currency in an independent Scotland. Ronnie trained as an accountant in Glasgow many years ago and founded several companies in the construction and manufacturing industries at home and overseas. He was also a member of an early Finance and Taxation Committee of the SNP, back when the SNP was little more than a political curiosity. That was the start of his studies into the workings of currencies and the banking system. The mysterious relationship between money and political power has been the focus of his research ever since. He has concluded that no country could describe itself as independent if its people were born into and remained permanently in debt. He was not referring to private debt, which is our personal choice and responsibility, but to the national debt. It constrains government from rational economic intervention and paralyses initiative. It is the ascent of financial capitalism over the public interest, and by tolerating it, we accept that the state is accountable to the money system. That is a nonsense, because the national currency is issued by the state free of debt and guaranteed by all the people in it as their means of exchanging their goods and services. It can belong to no one else. The privatization of the money system is the ultimate white-collar crime. By what logic or right have we handed a cartel of privately owned banks the privilege of owning the national currency and lending it back to the state as debt? More and more prominent economists and academics now believe this is the Pandora's box of all our financial woes. Independence presents us with a unique opportunity to incorporate the necessary reforms into a new Scottish currency, and that could transform the entire independence argument. This is how public investment has plummeted over the past 50 years. And yet, the UK sinks deeper into debt by the day. The national debt is just another financial bogeyman held by banks and institutions which know perfectly well that such bonds have no substance because they cannot and will not ever be repaid. So, where does all this debt come from?
Excuse me, John, this is money talking. Just before you explain where I come from, let me tell you what I am. Like my equally famous relations, kilograms, inches, and litres, we were all adopted by the state to make life easier when exchanging our goods and services. I do not appear on this list because I am the black sheep of the family. No one would suggest shortening inches or lightening kilograms. But alas, I am no longer under the guardianship of the state. I have become the creature of the bankers, so corrupted indeed that my value changes from day to day in accordance with the interests of the elite which controls me. Gradually, and over generations, I have become the instrument of an institutionalized fraud. Never forget the important difference between money, credit, and wealth, because that is why you stumble from one financial crisis to the next. I am the national currency issued by the state. Bank credit is not a substitute for me. It is a commercial service which enables me to circulate conveniently through your customer accounts. Like my relations, I have no intrinsic value, just a token or measurement to facilitate the exchange of goods and services. That is what creates the real wealth of nations. So let's look first at wealth. Private wealth is a house, a car, or other tangible possession, even a fridge with food in it, provided, of course, that they're fully paid for. If debt remains outstanding, then the wealth still exists, but it may partially belong to a creditor. Public wealth also comprises tangible assets like roads and rail tracks and public buildings. Some folk claim these are also associated with debt, the national debt, but we'll return to that again shortly. There are other factors commonly regarded as wealth, like education, good health, and the ability of a state to provide a basic pension and welfare. But these are not tangible goods and services traded in the marketplace. Rather, they are a benefit arising from the creation of wealth. I am guaranteed by the state and by you, the taxpayer. You shoulder all the responsibility of administering the national currency. Is that being done equitably and honestly? I don't think so, because today I am virtually owned and managed by the mega banking corporations. They have no interest in you or in building the wealth of the nation. They are in bed with the political establishment, and together they perceive me not as the means of creating real wealth, but as wealth itself. The financial world is awash with bank credit, but precious little is engaged in building real wealth, and certainly not public wealth. Politicians seem obsessed with keeping the financial merry-go-round spinning. Scotland may have to put up with this today, but it's just not good enough for tomorrow. So that's my story. I've done what I can. It's over to you to find the guts and the persistence and the self-confidence to insist upon writing your own banking laws and enforcing them. And now, as money always does, I'm going to slip through your fingers and return you to John to tell you about why Mervyn King, former Governor of the Bank of England, said in 2010, of all the many ways of organising banking, the worst is the one we have today.
Most people think the national currency is issued by the Treasury. In fact, That is a mere 3p of every pound in circulation. It's the cash in our pockets. Everything else is created by these fractional reserve banks as credit and, of course, debt. Not everyone is familiar with this magic process, so please bear with me for a moment. There are two basic types of bank, fractional and full reserve. First left is a fractional reserve bank, wherein the share capital and reserve amount to 1/10 of outstanding loans. Now, second left. That means that if 10% of its loans default, the bank becomes insolvent and collapses. Full reserve is third from the left. If this bank loses the same 10%, it takes a knock, but it remains sound. Up until 1986, all our building societies in the UK were full reserve and financed 100% of our mortgages from their members' savings and pensions. Indeed, that represented 70% of all loans within the UK. So, how do banks create our money from thin air? Well, of course, it isn't money. It's new credit, created with every loan and overdraft. When a bank makes a loan, it writes the amount into its books as an asset, a sum the borrower owes to the bank. On the other side, it writes a liability, the risk that the loan may default. Thus, the entire logic, substance and authority of our financial system today is founded upon two book entries in a privately owned bank. Some of this new money enters circulation legitimately as loans to customers, but much is used to purchase the government bonds which rack up the national debt. Even more is loaned to other banks to finance the dozens of financial markets which drive the familiar boom and bust cycles, which destabilise the entire economy. This banking system invites its own corruption and is an institutionalised fraud upon the public. Putting it right should be top of the pops for any campaign for Scottish independence. Historically, the national currency always originated with the state, and the banks dealt only in commercial credit. In the 200 years from 1750 to 1950, the purchasing power of the pound declined only by a factor of 3. Bank credit has overwhelmed sovereign money. Our economy grows at best some 2% a year, but bank credit grows at 9%. This chart illustrates how the financial economy is awash with bank credit, whilst the working economy languishes, because the state cannot afford to intervene with public investment. That is the social cost of privatising the money supply, and nothing will change for as long as the national currency remains interchangeable with virtually unlimited bank credit. This anomaly is not reconcilable and has defied all attempts to produce rational monetary policy. Before the age of electronic credit, half of all money in circulation was cash, like this. The state printed it and sent it to the banks for distribution. It was sovereign money, issued by the people and for the people, as their national currency. The states incurred no debt in doing this. When it was delivered to the banks in armoured vans and barrowed into the vaults, the government's account was credited, and it could then draw a cheque and spend the money in circulation on behalf of the community, a process known as seigniorage. This was why we could afford to rebuild Britain after the war, even though the country was broke. Within a few years, and the NHS was up and running, and free universal education introduced. Yet the national debt remained a tiny fraction of its present level. A return to these honest principles is the essence of the campaign for a Scottish currency. For too long, we've been so mesmerised with the convenience of credit, we failed to notice that all money had now become debt owed to the banks. We have austerity, minimal public investment, and economic stagnation, because the state no longer controls the money system and has lost the power to intervene. Just try to imagine if we had retained sovereignty over our currency and seigniorage had been updated to include electronic credit. Instead of delivering debt-free cash to the banks, it would be the national credit, also free of debt, being credited to the government's account. Instead of quantitative easing, funding bailouts, obscure money markets and asset bubbles, it would again enter circulation as government investment. National debt would be capped and progressively written off as bonds matured. The impact of that upon inflation, gainful full employment, modern infrastructure and prosperity would really transform our lives, rich and poor alike. The national debt is a relic of the days when money was gold, and the only way a state could get its hands on the stuff was by taxation or borrowing. When the gold standard was abandoned and everyone adopted fiat currencies, the last vestige of logic for national debt evaporated. A fiat currency is simply a paper token backed by nothing more than public confidence and the guarantee of the state. When we reject national debt and fractional reserve banking, we reject financial feudalism, and we assert the right of every child to be born free of debt. When an independent Scotland adopt the Scots pound issued only by its central bank, then it can free itself of sterling, the Bank of England, the City of London, international money markets, and the national debt. In short, all the financial parasites. Our own currency would circulate debt-free within Scotland's borders. We would have fully regulated banks and use sterling and other currencies only for foreign trade and tourism. Meantime, we participate in the money game according to rules written by the banker. He insists he behaves ethically and honestly. They tell us the money business is safe in their hands. I don't think so. It is time to rewrite the rules of monopoly. Bankers accuse politicians of being irresponsible when it comes to managing the money system. That may be the pot calling the kettle black, but there is some truth in it. Senior politicians know perfectly well that they are being manipulated by lobbyists of vested interests, but are loath to disturb the establishment. They do, however, listen to public opinion. And if we can mobilise the independence movement to join this campaign, then Scotland could be on the verge of a second enlightenment, no less significant than that of Adam Smith all those years ago. Before you dismiss this as pie in the sky, ask yourself, why not? Invest a few hours in reading this book, which explodes the money myth and presents a Scottish currency as the primary building block of independence. Here is all the information that neither Mr. Tsipras, the Greek Prime Minister, nor Mr. Salmond had at their fingertips when it was needed. Thinking outside the box brings us conveniently to the official campaign for a Scottish currency. The objective is to explain why the banking system works against the public interest, and to promote an alternative system as a key element of the written constitution of an independent Scotland. The strategy combines two initiatives. 1. A think tank which presents practical and detailed proposals for consideration by government ministers, MSPs, Treasury officials, petition and similar committees, and interested institutions and organisations. 2. A peaceful pressure group to build public opinion towards a popular demand for serious change to the banking and financial system, which will benefit the community rather than a privileged elite. The think tank, the Centre for Scottish Constitutional Studies, already exists, as does the draft constitution. Article 6 sets out the architecture of a constitutional monetary authority, having an independent status above government and similar to the judiciary in Scotland. Under its authority, the Central Bank of Scotland will provide interest-free credit to commercial banks chartered in Scotland, bridging the period until they become full reserve intermediaries. The CMA will also make available similar credits to the State Investment Bank, which will be invested exclusively into national assets and infrastructure. This will be the sole source of new or additional money entering circulation. Understandable banking will have returned to Scotland. This is our call to Yes and SNP activists. We need a powerful group of enthusiasts who share this vision of financial independence and who believe we must put this firmly into the political mainstream now and well before the next referendum. We need leaders and activists, organisers, banking and political insiders, and media buffs who can produce a video more professionally than this one. But if we have the self-confidence to stand our ground against the financial elite, then we can be truly independent. Only then will the Scots once again decide the terms, if any, upon which they are prepared to share their newfound sovereignty. If you would like to be kept in touch or help us get the campaign into the mainstream, please leave your contact details on the form provided and slip it into the box at the exit. Where practicable, Andy Anderson is offering to lead small local discussion groups aimed at a better understanding of what, for far too many good people, is the secret society of the 1%. He will tell you about this later. Thank you for listening, and we will be happy to try and answer any questions you may have.